Greetings and salutations, folks, and welcome once again, as always, to another helping of Mr H's Hot Pot. You join me today, making my way up Winter Hill, which lies on Rivington Moor in the northwest of England. And for anybody who's interested in the exact geographical location, it lies on the boundaries between the boroughs of Chorley, Bolton and Blackburn with Darwin. And I've come here, Hot Potters, today, number one for a bimble to stretch the old legs, get some fresh air in the lungs, but number two, I'm going to try and seek out for you the crash site of the 1958 Winter Hill Air disaster, which happened on the 27th of February, one cold winter's morning back in 1958, when 35 people tragically lost their lives on these bleak hills here that lie behind me. And they was on a chartered flight that was going from the Isle of Man, making its way over to Manchester, and sadly the plane never made it. It crashed into the hill, and we're going to try and seek out the crash site for you today. Now, I'm currently on the main road that leads up to Winter Hill Transmitter Station, which is what Winter Hill is quite famous for. And that sign behind me there, I don't know if you can make out the writing, but it states that you have to leave all civilian vehicles at this point and go up on foot if you want to go up any further, unless of course you're an authorised vehicle, which we are not. So I'm going to leave the old jalopy behind at this point, and we're going to make our way up this long winding road. Now, it is quite a slog. I have done this in the past with Mrs H and the girls, and I've not been up here for quite a while. It has changed a little bit. They've since made it macadam, so it's a little bit better underfoot. But it's still an hard slog, and I'll just have to take my time going up there because I haven't done a walk like this for quite a while. But I'm going to make my way up there now, and hopefully we'll have a bit of a rest point halfway up, and we'll talk a little bit more about the air crash, and then we'll make our way onto the crash site itself. I'm also going to take a look at a number of memorials that have been placed up here since the crash to commemorate those who lost their lives. Anyway, without further ado, let's make our way up there, shall we? And there's the Winter Hill transmitter rising out of the ground. Now what we're going to be doing, we're going to be making our way up this long, lonely and bleak moor road that winds all the way around and goes all the way off there and round to the transmitter itself. Now the actual crash site is just to the right of the transmitter there. If you can see two smaller towers, it happened just behind that. That wasn't there in 1958, but that's where the crash site is. That's where we're going to be making our way to. Now, we've still got quite a way to go yet, so I'll just keep slogging on. But it must have been very difficult for the rescue crews back in 1958 who made their way along this same road, and they had to do it on foot because, by all accounts, it was full of snow early that morning, and they just had to make their way up on foot. They had to abandon the vehicles down the hill, roughly where Mr H has abandoned the old jalopy, and make their way up on foot, which slowed down the rescue operation considerably. Anyway, I'm going to continue now, make my way up there, and we'll stop and we'll have another little rest when we get a bit further up, and I'll tell you a little bit more of the story.
The road is long.
Now, it's quite a while since myself and Mrs H was last up here on these moorlands, and the last time we was here, these that you can see in the background, these fire beaters, they weren't here. They've been placed here since the Moorland fires a number of years ago, and the idea being that they can stop a fire before it starts, really. Also, barbecues and little campfires have been banned on this moorland in summertime ever since those fires which devastated this moorland. I have done a video of that. Myself and Mrs H went and took a little nosy at those fires. If you'd like to see that video after watching this one, of course, I'll place a link in for you now. And we'll take a closer look at these fire beaters now, because there's a number of these dotted all around, and when I saw them in the distance I wondered what it was all about, so I'll whip the camera around and we'll take a quick little look at them now, shall we? So this is a closer look at one of those fire precautions that have appeared on the moorland since Mrs H and Mr H were last up here. And as you can see, there's a sign on there by the Woodland Trust reminding walkers that this is a high fire risk area and that no barbecues or open fires to take place. And all the beaters are is simply a long pole with a piece of thick rubber attached to the end, and the idea being you would just basically beat the fire out if one broke out. Very simple. Very cheap, but hopefully effective. With a bit of luck, those will not be needed. Anyway, I'll whip the camera around now and we'll continue on our journey. So what, Potters, unsurprisingly, the story begins in the Isle of Man at Ronaldsway Airport, which lies just outside Douglas. There were 39 passengers and 3 crew boarded a Silver City Airways Bristol 170 Wayfarer aircraft. And the idea of this trip on this particular day, that fateful day, was a bit of a corporate jolly. These gentlemen, 39 of them, were from the motor trade, and they were flying from the Isle of Man, and they were going to visit the hillside battery company, which was located in Clifton Junction of Manchester back then, and then they was going to go on to go and take a look at a motor car show in Manchester. So they was on a bit of a corporate jolly basically, and they'd chartered this private plane to bring them over here. And unfortunately, things went wrong that day, not just with the crash itself. Like all disasters, they all begin with one link in a chain of events, and if you remove any one of those links, the disaster usually would not happen. But it started with a quarter of an hour delay at Ronaldsway Airport, and the pilots, anxious to get the passengers over here to begin the day trip, because they was only here for a day, they decided to take a slot that wasn't the normal flying slot. The idea was that they would normally fly at an altitude of 3,500 feet, but because there was the delay, anyone who's ever been on holiday and stuck on a runway, you know how anxious you get. In order to get them up in the air, they accepted an altitude of 1,500 feet. Normally that wouldn't have mattered because they would not have passed over this particular area. But due to pilot error, they locked onto the wrong aeronautical beacon. There was one for Wigan, which they would have passed over Wigan, and there was one for Oldham. Unfortunately, the pilot locked onto the one for Oldham, which brought him dangerously close to Winter Hill. Now there was also cloud, and fog on these hills that particular morning. So the moment he flew into that, he was reliant upon the instruments of his aircraft and the control tower at Manchester. Now, when they was coming up to Winter Hill, over in Manchester, the guy in the control tower, he could actually see that there was a problem and the aircraft was flying dangerously close to Winter Hill. So he contacted the aircraft and he said, "Do you have visual contact with the ground?" Which had to say negative, he was flying blind. So he ordered him from the control tower, he ordered the pilot to make, I think it was a 200-degree turn, something like that, to the right to get back on course. And unfortunately, he only got 45 degrees into it, and his right wing hit the side of the hill, and the plane went cartwheeling across these moors and broke up, and it killed the passengers. And that's what happened, unfortunately, Hot Potters. Now, we're making our way up to the transmitter station, so I'll leave the story there because there was a rescue operation, there was a lot to it really. But those were the main events that led to this crash. Now, I'm just skimming over the events, really, because I am up here. It is a little bit windy up here. I do apologise for any wind that will be caught on camera. That's just the way it goes when you're out on the moors. But if anybody wants to go more in depth in the story, there's a cracking website run by a fellow by the name of Patrick Taylor, and he's sort of documented every step of what went wrong that day. So I'll put a link to his website in the description of this video, and I do recommend people go there and take a look because it's really interesting how this thing unfolded. I mean, it's hard to imagine now. We're here, 2021, we have modern satellite navigation systems, and other than human error itself, it would never have happened. But unfortunately, back in 1958, they were still using probably wartime technology or things that were born out of the Second World War, and it's just alien to us today, imagining what sort of stuff they was using back then. But that's what happened, unfortunately. Now, there are a number of memorials that have been put up here. One in 1989, which is on the side of the transmitter station, and there's one on a fence post not too far away from the crash site. We'll go and take a look at those, because they are quite impressive, really, and these people should be remembered. Now, unfortunately, this disaster doesn't really get the recognition it deserves, despite Hot Potters, as of 2010, being the worst high ground crash, and I believe overall it's the 11th worst for the loss of life as of 2010. The reason I think it's overshadowed is because 3 weeks earlier to this happening up on these moors, the Munich disaster happened, where football lost many of its stars and left a lot of football fans, especially Manchester United ones, wondering what if. So this one sort of got forgotten about, really, especially with the people coming from the Isle of Man. They weren't really known on the mainland, and it's just a shame, really, although it has started being commemorated all these years on. Anyway, I'm now approaching the transmitter station. I'm getting a bit out of breath, as you can probably tell, because I'm walking up a steep incline and trying to talk at the same time. So I'll get to the top and then we'll resume this film from there. And things have certainly changed a lot since I was last up here at Potters with Mrs H, as this little compound here that's behind me, which is now abandoned, that used to have a big flashing light array on it, and the idea was that if the lights were flashing during the winter time, then you wasn't to proceed any further, because the mast up there, it's tied to the floor with huge ropes to keep it in place, and the idea is that ice can form on those ropes, and if you was to walk underneath them, they could fall and it could potentially kill you. So they used to have a big light array in that compound telling you that you hadn't to proceed any further. I suppose now with modern technology they can shut this road off and keep people away, but that's how they used to do it. Now, I can't resist a little bit of urban exploration, so I'm just going to make a slight detour from this video, and I'm going to go inside that compound and see if we can see any remnants from the old light array that used to stand there. And as you can see, there's the sign that's warning you, beware falling ice, it is dangerous to pass this point when lights are flashing. Now, it's only, what, 2015, 2014 I was last up here with Mrs H, and as I said, this compound was all fenced off, you couldn't get in. But today, the fence lies on the ground, so we'll step over and just see what we can see. And as you can see, there's just a concrete area. Bit of a drainage hole there. There used to be a light array in here, and you couldn't proceed any further beyond that. I never came up here during winter. I wasn't brave enough. There's another little pipe, probably held some wires or something at one point. And that's just looking back the way we've come. Not really much to see in here, but it is part of the Winter Hill history, really. We'll make our way out of here now and get back on the road and make our way up to the mast itself. So we're now approaching the transmitter buildings, and these played a crucial role, really, in the rescue operation on the 27th of February 1958, because once the plane had crashed and it broke up on the moors, luckily the crew survived, and the co-pilot, the gentleman who'd actually turned the plane into the hill on the recommendation of the control tower at Manchester, he came and made his way over to this transmitter building section over here. Now, whether or not these buildings are the original ones, because the transmitter's certainly different from the one that was here in 1958, I don't know, but he made his way into the buildings, went into the control room, and luckily there was a few engineers working that morning. And imagine the surprise when a pilot burst into the room with a tattered uniform, covered in blood, and basically he said to them, "There's been a crash, can you please help me?" So immediately one of the engineers telephoned down into Horwich, which lies at the bottom of Winter Hill, to one of the local police stations. He handed the telephone over to the co-pilot, and then they made their way, following the co-pilot's footprints in the snow, to where the crash site was. And that's how the rescue operation began. Now, on the side of this wall here, there's a gentleman sat here with his bike. There is a memorial to the crash, and this is the first one of the two. This one was unveiled in 1989 by, rather fittingly, one of the 7 survivors of this crash, who had gone on to become the Mayor of Douglas. Anyway, I'm going to make my way up to where this memorial plaque is on this wall, and we'll take a look at it. Now, this is the first of the memorials to the Winter Hill disaster that have been erected up here on Winter Hill. This one was unveiled in 1989, and it was unveiled by a survivor who, as you can read, went on to become the Mayor of Douglas in the Isle of Man. Now, the wooden frame and the light above the memorial, I think those was put there about 2016 when I was last up here with Mrs H, which was long before little Toby James was born. That wooden frame and that light wasn't here. It was just the memorial, which is on the side of one of the buildings here on the TV transmitting station. But it's the most impressive of the two memorials, not taking anything away from the second one, which we'll go and take a look at in a moment. But this one is the most impressive. And it's nice that they've acknowledged all the help that the people from Horwich, and at the time the engineers who worked in this building, or the buildings that used to be here, gave to try and help the people who unfortunately was involved in that plane crash. Anyway, we'll now make our way further up and head on towards the actual crash site itself. And here's a closer look at the buildings of the main TV transmitter here at Winter Hill. No idea if any of these are original. I would have been here in 1958. Judging from the style, they could very well, possibly, be original. Or maybe through there is where the co-pilot made his way through on that fateful morning to the shocked engineers. And there we have the modern day mast. And it's only when you're out at the side of it like this you realise just how tall it is. I certainly wouldn't want to be going up that. Anyway, I just thought I'd take a look at the transmitter building. We'll now push on and make our way further on up towards the crash site. Now, another interesting little memorial that lies up here on Winter Hill, not far away from the television transmitter, is a memorial known as Scotsman's Stump, which is basically just a cast iron pillar that's set into the ground. But it commemorates the life and the spot where a young man named George Henderson was found murdered in 1838, and it's believed he was murdered for the money that he was carrying on him at the time, which would have been a considerable amount. as he was a traveller who went round collecting money from clients. And it's an interesting story. It was never solved, the murder. It's a bit of a murder mystery, and we may come and take a look at that another time. But we're now going to make our way over to that tower, where we'll see the second of these memorials to the Winter Hill disaster of 1958, and hopefully we'll be able to locate the actual crash site. So we're going to make our way over there now, and join me once I get to the second of these memorials. Now, for me, the saddest part of this story is when they had a subsequent inquiry after the disaster, they found that the control tower at Manchester had advised the co-pilot who sadly crashed the plane. He was the one that told him to change course, and it came out afterwards that had he not ordered the co-pilot to do that, then they would have survived, because the plane would have missed Winter Hill, only just, but it would have just continued on its flight path heading out towards Oldham. Then what would have happened, it would have come out of the cloud and the fog. The pilots would have eventually, from seeing landmarks on the ground, realised that they was on the wrong flight path, and they would have corrected themselves safely. Unfortunately, that didn't happen, because the pilot, or the co-pilot, was relying heavily on the control tower over in Manchester. In no way can you really blame the fella who was working the control tower that day. He could see on his radar that there was danger, and that plane was in imminent danger, and he made a snap decision. And unfortunately, it was the wrong decision. He's had to live with that the rest of his life, just as I suppose the pilot, the co-pilot who survived, had to live with his decisions as well. Anyway, we're now making our way to where this memorial is. I can see the plaque on the gate post here, and I believe that there is a piece of debris up here from the plane. I have been told about this before, but I've never seen it documented, but I can see it here, so we'll take a look at that. And here it is, folks. This is the second of the memorial plaques that lie up here on Winter Hill. This one was placed here in 2008 by the Rotary Clubs of Douglas and Horwich. And as you can see, it says, commemorating the death of 35 members of the motor trade from the Isle of Man, whose Bristol Wayfarer crashed near this plaque 27th of February 1958. Erected by the Rotary Clubs of Douglas and Horwich, 27th of the 2nd, 2008, and that would have marked the 50th anniversary of this tragedy. And as you can see here, it's a lovely view from up here, albeit very bleak. Now, by all accounts, even a few decades after, you could still come up here and find little bits and pieces of wreckage, although the main pieces of the plane had been taken away a long time ago. But I estimate it's just behind that tower though where it actually happened. You can actually see where the ground gives way a little bit. Certainly when you go on Google Maps, the coordinates are for just behind that tower, so I'm going to make my way round there, see how far I can get, and see if there is any little remnants of scarring or anything like that on the land. I very much doubt it, because that tower wasn't there in 1958. That's since been built, so that's probably covered most of where this site was, where this plane crash happened. There is a little piece of debris of some description here, but I don't think this is part of the plane, although people have tried to say that this was part of it, but I don't think it is. But I could be wrong on that. But no, that looks more like farming material to me, or something from the transmitters. It doesn't look like it's part of a plane, that, but as I say, I could be wrong. We'll now make our way to the actual crash site. So folks, we're now at the final part of this bimble, and we're actually approaching what is believed to be the crash site. And I'm now at the back of that tower, and the way you can always tell where the crash site was if you count the fence posts from the chain link fencing, and I think it's the 5th post coming this way, so I'm making my way now towards it, and you can actually see that there's a ridge where the wing would have touched, and it would have sent the plane cartwheeling across these moors. We are on a bit of a public footpath, so it's not too bad. I didn't know if I would be able to get right up to the actual crash site, because a lot of these videos that talk about and document this crash, I've never seen one that actually brings you to the exact spot. They all, more or less, just show you the memorials and that. I mean, there's nothing to see these days. As I said, it's since grown back, so it was said that for quite a while nothing would grow here due to the aviation fuel that had soaked in to the ground. And it was also said that for a number of decades afterwards you could come here and you could find little bits of wreckage lying on top of the ground, you know, little nuts and bolts and that. The majority of the wreckage would have been taken away, no doubt, but little bits and pieces you could still find. But there'll be nothing here today, just really this hill that's just a silent reminder of what went on. I will try and put some then and now photographs in, but it's very hard to get an actual sighting of where it actually happened. But it is a bit of a ridge, and you can see how it would have happened, really. And it must have just been very difficult for the people trying to get up here. And it was believed that some survivors perished actually on the moor after they'd survived the crash, but because it took so long getting rescue help from down at the bottom, because as I said, they had to bring them up on foot. They couldn't make their way through, the first rescuers from down in Norwich, as they had to divert a snow plough away from work on the A6 and bring it up here. Although men from the quarry, there's a quarry down at the bottom, they had set to with shovels and had started to clear it all off. But yeah, this is the actual site, this is where it happened. Very eerie, very eerie. And here's where I think it actually happened, Hot Potters. You can clearly see the ground drops away there. I think the plane came in and it turned into this hill here. And you can still see a scar in the ground here. And funnily enough, there's a wooden peg here that's just been knocked into the ground, and it seems to have no purpose. There's no others around here where I've been walking, so I wonder if someone has actually knocked that in the ground to mark where this plane crashed into the hillside. But you can clearly see where the ground is gouged out here, leaving a scar. And I wonder if this was the point of impact, and then the plane went cartwheeling over towards the mast, which is where the old mast used to be, and the wreckage came to rest about 100 yards to 200 yards away from this point here. So it would have come to rest roughly where that tower is today. Very eerie to be stood here, because it's very quiet. Although back in 1958, those engineers, it was that windy and that terrible that morning. None of them heard the plane crash or an impact, although one of them later said they thought they'd heard a whooshing sound. Right then, I'm going to make my way back onto the main path, and I think we'll wrap this video up. Okay folks, well I'm going to wrap this video up, I think. I'm now back on the main path, and I'm fast approaching the main TV transmitter buildings, where once again I'll walk that long winding road back to the old jalopy. Now before I go, I just want to give me final thoughts on this one. As I said at the beginning of this video, as with any disaster, it's always a chain of events, and if you remove just one link, then that disaster doesn't happen. Anyway, I'm out of here, so until the next time, from myself, Mr. H, which hopefully will be very soon, it is bye-bye for now.